great. It's great to be here. It was a great energetic session just now, Vinod. Here, I'm going to turn around. It's been 15 years, I think, since we were on stage together. I don't know if Vinod even requires an introduction. I'm Matt Marshall, founder and editor-in-chief of VentureBeat. We're covering innovation and AI closer than just about anyone else. And Vinod, I started covering him when I started VentureBeat. And I think we had a couple panels together like this, but it's been a long time. And Vinod was a co-founder of Sun Microsystems. And for those of you who are not familiar with Sun, it was one of the most, it was a very pivotal company. I see some people laughing, some serious, because we never know what Sun was, but it was all about the computer and the network, right? And then Vinod moved on to Kleiner Perkins at a time when Kleiner, with probably the exception of Sequoia, headquartered the venture market and had invested in companies like Netscape, little companies like Google, and then Vinod personally leading the investments in the telecom build out and the network build out that allowed the internet to happen. And we started talking in 2005 actually 2007 started VentureBeat, and we started really talking together more in kind of the 2005, 6, 7 timeframe when the internet actually, remember it was Web 2.0, and the internet started allowing the things that we'd always wanted it to do, this interactive, real-time capabilities. And so the reason I want to go back there, Vinod, is because I think many people are starting to compare the Gen AI revolution with the internet when people are looking for comparisons. Can you take us back to what you felt then and what you're feeling now and how you compare those two eras?
So good afternoon, everybody. I always love talking to founders, and I know there's a lot of founders here, so that's great. Let me give you the following perspective. People ask me, because it was 2018 when we decided to invest in OpenAI. None of the current hype or excitement was there. And people ask me, why did you place a large bet? It was the largest check I've written in almost 40 years in venture capital by a factor of 2, the largest initial check. So it was real conviction. And it has a lot of analogy to the internet. When we started Sun in 1982, we used TCP/IP. That seems obvious to people, but nobody accepted TCP/IP. And in 1996, we started, and myself and Pradeep Sindhu incubated a company called Juniper. How many people know Juniper? Enough hands. But here's the funny thing. Every major telco, no exceptions, told me in 1996 they would never adapt TCP/IP. But I had seen and read about the internet starting in the 70s, that some we had adapted in 1982. It kept growing like an exponential, but the beginnings of an exponential are really flat. So even in 1996, nobody acknowledged TCP/IP would be important, so we just said, we'll do it. In fact, Cisco told me they'd never do a TCP/IP router over OC12, which is my home service, actually less than that today. They'd never do a router about that. Where's the analogy? I've seen this happen in AI. And since about 2010 or so, in 2012, I wrote in fact 2011, I wrote 2 controversial blogs. One was called Do We Need Doctors? And it was in TechCrunch. The other was called Do We Need Teachers? The idea was very clear. AI would be doing these functions. And nobody believed it was even remotely possible or that AI would be important. But you saw the exponential keep growing. 2018, it was obvious to me there was so much talent going into AI and starting to see investment and a credible group like OpenAI that we invested. But we are still at the beginning of the exponential. Maybe ChatGPT was the knee of the curve in the exponential. You start seeing this steep part, but I think it's very, very clear that most people, even today, don't understand how large the implications can be. That's what's exciting about it. And I want to make one other comment. Let me ask for a show of hands. How many of you are really doing AI that's not transformer based? One hand, a few hands. That's interesting. If I sit here and ask the question, what will be important in 5 or 6 years? Clearly, transformer models will be around. But there will be other models around that add substantially to AI capabilities. It's almost sad to see so few hands go up, but because that's sort of really exciting in terms of infrastructure and models. How many people have heard of the rabbit? I should have brought mine. Enough hands. How many people realize it's not a transformer model? It's not even a piece of hardware. It's a neurosymbolic model trained to, so a few hands. My point is to think diversely about what's possible. I mean, we can go into a lot of detail. I gave a TED talk on Tuesday on all the applications that we will see. So,
okay, we've got so many places we could go. Let's drill down on that one though, because
my clock isn't moving, so we have plenty of time.
So we got plenty of time. At some point, maybe 30 minutes will go on there. But let's talk a little bit about. We want to reserve some time for questions, so build your questions. You did a contrarian. You started out with a reference to how you were a contrarian from the beginning. You always liked that contrarian role ever since I've known you. Where do you see...
Well, if you do everything everybody else is doing, how are you going to be doing anything different?
Exactly. So you're going to be...
I mean, it's by definition, it's a circular argument.
Superior returns, you've got to be original and different. So where do you see yourself the most contrarian to today's... I mean, you just saw a whole room going one direction. Are you contrarian to that? Or
we've placed a number of bets that are not LLM. We are placing plenty of bets that are LLM based, but the model winners are defined today, the leaders. There's 3 or 4 that will do well, and I believe that. But beyond that, there's orthogonal places people are going with new kinds of AI capability that we're doing a lot. Neurosymbolic, I mentioned. How many people doing probabilistic programming of one for another? One hand, okay, 2. How many people have read liquid networks and what they're doing as a different approach to robotics? A few hands. But I would suggest everybody here, whether you're doing LLMs or some transform models or something else, keep track of everything that's going on, which is near impossible, but it can be done. Because capability will show up and be important to whatever you're doing. So keep learning. We're very, very early in this learning cycle.
There are a lot of founders in the room. One of the questions we were throwing around is where does innovation come from? And maybe we can answer this in a number of ways. But again, going back to the Kleiner-Perkins investment in Netscape, the investment in Netscape was the beginning that many people call of the internet revolution, right? And the poster boy, Mark Andreesen, right?
I still remember going to the corner of El Camino and Castro in Mountain View, and there was Mark and 2 others. Netscape was a 3-person company. I met them on a Saturday morning, And I called John Doerr and said, we should make this investment.
So,
I still remember it vividly, the building.
so you've been there, and so Sam Altman is considered the poster boy of Gen AI in terms of what they did. Maybe we talk about where does innovation come from, but what did Sam do? You know, when you talk about these individuals, these who make a moment, can you talk a little bit about that? Is that a fair?
Well, let me answer more generally the question of what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs always, the really good entrepreneurs, and Sam's one of them, Dr. Carlson's another one, and I can go through a long list of entrepreneurs. Last weekend was actually the 20th anniversary of Koshla Ventures. And so, you know, looking at entrepreneurs like Max Levchin and Patrick Carlson and John Collison and Jack Dorsey and Sam, and I can go on. There's one thing, they have a passion for a vision. They have a clear idea of where they're going. And they're obstinate about their vision. But oddly, they're really flexible about their tactics. You know, there's some entrepreneurs, and I run into a lot of them, that are so sure they don't want to talk about anything. These really good entrepreneurs are always questioning their assumptions, and they listen to all input, but then evaluate it with first principles. They reject a lot of it, but they never say, no, I already understand, I don't need to talk to you. With any of these entrepreneurs, every time you raise a question, they wanted to dig deeper. So even though they have real obstinate belief in their vision, they're very flexible on learning, and I would say the single biggest characteristic is not domain expertise. It's the fastest learning rate because they ask a lot of questions, but they're not swayed by opinions of others just because they have an important title, but because they can convince them from first principles that something will work. It's incredible how simple that sounds, but how few entrepreneurs, either they're so convinced they don't want to listen to any other advice, or they listen to experts and listen too much. And both are really, really bad.
So you were the first outside, I mean, so I introduced you and mentioned the Kleiner Perkins affiliation, but yeah, you co-founded Koshla Ventures, you've invested in Stripe and Square, Instacart, the list goes on, right, of successful companies. OpenAI, you were the first outside investor.
Venture investor. We invested with, a couple of individuals invested with us in Singapore.
Right. So that must have surprised you what happened at the end of last year when Sam was kicked out. And so we're talking about these iconic entrepreneurs. You talked about the patterns, but these individuals, you know, Sam is different, right? He's got a bunch going on. He's not all in on OpenAI. A lot of confusion. So, you know, a lot of confusion. What's going on with Sam? Where is he in his journey? You know, maybe take us back to the patterns and where he is.
Well, things are in a better place than they were before it started. So in retrospect, we should say we are happier things happened the way they did.
Yeah.
It's not that important. It was somebody, Helen Tomer and others, sort of getting a bug in their head on some nonsensical EA thing, and you know, it's so demented. I thought that was more like a Jonestown-like belief and not worth talking about. I have no respect for what they did.
Great. So in terms of your perspective,
Especially if any entrepreneur here knows, they should be evaluated on their performance. And the performance was so stellar, outside of what any company had ever done before, whether you measured it by the level of technology development, you measured it by the level of impact, the number of users, 5-6 times faster to 100 million than TikTok, in every dimension. And the team did well. That's how you evaluate an entrepreneur.
So, let's just finish up on that real quick. So where do you think he is on that journey? Where do you think OpenAI is in the journey? A lot of competitors, a lot of folks say, hey, there's a closing in from Claude and others.
So I do fundamentally believe there will be multiple models. There won't be 20. There will be general models, foundation models, state-of-the-art models, and there's probably 3 or 4. Leaving aside China, and that's a whole different discussion. But then there'll be specialized models. With David Howe, we've done a model in Japan. Why? Because the kanji script and the context is different. So Sakana is the company doing that. We have a similar model company in India called Sarma, because they're 13 different scripts just in India. If you use tokenization that you use in English language script, or Western languages script, you're 3 to 5 times less efficient in tokenization, for example. And then the cost-sensitive world, where this particular company wants to target like 1 cent per minute of LLM use kind of cost structures, because cost matters a lot in India. If 1.5 million people are using it, you do need some specialized things. Rabbit is a neurosymbolic model geared towards running other people's applications, not developing and other LLMs. And they have great relationship with Perplexity. So there will be lots of things. I'm pretty excited about, for example, we're investors in by the way, for those of you at the seed stage, this is the right way to do it. Anytime people are raising large amounts of money in early round, I'm 100% convinced their probability of success goes down. The probability of success goes down from the founder's perspective. I did this analysis a long time ago, and I looked at everything where we put a small amount of money versus large. When we put large, it's less likely to be successful. It's now OpenAI was an exception because it was much later stage into its journey. They had a pretty good idea of what they want to do. But I mentioned Symbolica doing this esoteric approach to neurosymbolic called category theory. I suspect most people haven't heard the term, obscure mathematical concept. Guy claimed he could do X, Y, and Z. We gave him $2 million beginning of 2023. He came back beginning of 2024 and said, here, I've delivered on everything. But more importantly, he had defined his own path much better than if he had raised $30 million to begin with. He'd done much more examination of the questions. And that's what small amounts of money does. Gets you on a better path. I think anybody raising large amounts of money in robotics, you see that, is less likely to succeed than the people raising smaller amounts of money, because they will examine their assumptions more than if you get the freedom to keep spending. So the absolute probability of success goes up. Symbolic, he delivered everything at Symbolica. I had one meeting with him. In the meeting we said, well, we'll give you the next 15 if you want that. He said, great. Took 3 days to do the whole run. We never looked outside. We never went anywhere else. He'd proven what he could do. But he was very precise. And that's sort of like a really good approach. My advice to founders. I didn't know what we were talking about.
Yeah, we're going to go all over this. We're going to go up, and we're going to come back down into the details, and we'll get some questions. I want to save some time. Just you published a list of predictions back in November of 23, probably a year after OpenAI really came to the scene, and how there's a number of these predictions about how largely Gen AI focus was going to impact re-engineering our society. From healthcare.
Can I have you hold that question, because I think there's another part on the entrepreneurship.
I want to always go to the entrepreneur.
Yeah, given you're all entrepreneurs, there's a couple of things I say that are very important. I sort of talked about this. The single most important thing an entrepreneur does, since we were talking about defining entrepreneurs, is deciding whose opinion to trust on what topic. There's nothing more important. Everybody you know will give you an opinion, whether they're qualified to or not. And so, if you don't go through this fundamental first principles thinking process on whose opinion you want, and whether the opinion is valid, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I would venture to guess the vast majority of advice entrepreneurs get from people who haven't built large companies themselves will be wrong. Because entrepreneurship is not intuitive. It doesn't make normal sense. For example, in the 40 years I've done innovation, I can't think of a single large innovation that came from somebody who knew the area they were innovating in. Can you imagine somebody at Hertz or Avis doing Uber? Can you imagine somebody at Lockheed or Airbus doing SpaceX or Rocket Lab? Not one example of a large innovation that came from a large company or a company that was in the space or a person, even an expert in the area. Pretty telling. Why? Because really smart people outside an area ask a lot of first principles questions and they arrive at the answer. If it's an expert, they extrapolate the past into what the next thing will be, and they don't try all the things they could have taught because the experience tells them that won't work. So entrepreneurs really think very differently, and I really want to emphasize, don't trust too many people with their opinions. It's a pretty important principle. The other thing that entrepreneurs do that I think is often wrong is see who they know and their friends and say, let's start a company together. You want to engineer the gene pool of a company, so the other really important thing you do is who your first 5 hires are. And the people you hire at position 25 or 125, batch number, are going to be determined by the first 5 people because they'll interview everybody else. It's so important, and I don't think entrepreneurs pay enough attention to how to compose their initial team. And I even have, there's some rigorous things you can do in picking your team. I have a blog I wrote probably 10, 15 years ago called How to Engineer the Gene Pool of a Startup, somewhere on our website. But beyond that, it's what does somebody bring that's complementary to what I know? I'm a great hacker, I know another great hacker. That's not the best composition for a startup team. Diversity in thinking is a very good metric. So think about who you get on your team. I just wanted to make sure how to compose teams, how to take advice, how to think through is really, really important for entrepreneurs, and so many mistakes get made. And whoever your investors are, if they haven't gone through this process and how it might impact when you're going from 100 million to $1 billion in revenue, that gets set in the first 10 people you hire. I'd like to say there's a massive difference with a $0 million company and a $0 billion company, and it's mostly about how you think about things. So, back to your predictions.
We know we've got 7 and some change left, so I want to go to the audience. I want to make sure we get some questions. Anyone have a question? You want to shout it out? Oh, here's a mic.
Hey Vinod, I'm Haida. I'm an investor at Berkeley. My question was compared to what you've said in the past, what different role is open source playing in this path to utopia? Especially because a lot of mainstream companies are now supporting open source through libraries and public models, including Facebook or Hugging Face. So do you think it's similar to earlier open source input in big data, or is it completely new and we need to look at open source deeper?
Well, so let's look at the value of open source in creating enhanced models. It's pretty significant. I think at Sun, we were the first company to adapt open source in NFS. How many people know NFS? Yeah. So we literally started the open source movement. I have some very funny stories around how unusual it was to do open source. Linux came after that, and then other open source. We're also the first investor in GitLab, which was really the completely open source compared to GitHub, which was for open source, but GitHub wasn't open source. That's why GitLab made so much faster progress. What has happened, and Postgres is a great example, Amazon's owned open source because they've become very good at taking the general intellectual property and leveraging it to the max. Not many open source models have been successful recently because of how good Amazon is at leveraging open source. If they have the rest of the cost structure in a particular place, then and especially come to really large markets like Postgres, they've done an amazing job, but they've made it much harder for entrepreneurs to build a business out of open source. That's sort of one level of it, but still, if you want more creativity, if you're say a video company like Pika or somebody, and you want to compete against Sora, open source is probably not a bad strategy. There's a completely different, very narrow case in which I've sort of started to oppose open source. And that's at the national interest of the US level. I was just talking to a company this week, AI company, and they said they were publishing everything, and the Chinese were replicating everything they were doing. And since they stopped publishing, the Chinese haven't made as much progress. This was a Fusion company, so different but the same idea. In Fusion, there's a general tradition of publishing everything you do so others can examine it. But this particular company stopped publishing, and the Chinese have stopped making progress. And I think our biggest battle is battle of who wins the AI race. And it's no question about it. It's us or the Chinese. Okay.
Great.
There's a question, yes?
Could you comment on...
So I think open source for state-of-the-art models is a bad idea from a national interest point of view, because the Chinese take a big advantage of it.
My question to you, Vinod, is programming biology and molecular machines. Of course, with AI, it's a pretty significant leap, even from a human evolution standpoint.
It wasn't really possible until AlphaFold.
Yeah, so how do you see that panning out in the next decade? Doctors, yes, we can replace, but it just seems like very minimal compared to programming biology from ground up in a significant way.
So for example, we have a company that's doing drugs for one person. Like, there's no clinical trials to run because your target is one person and their particular label. Huge opportunity. It's only possible in the world of AI. And level of precision that's possible. I like to say medicine is the practice of medicine, is pretty good medicine, but it'll become the science of medicine mostly because of things like AI.
Hi. First of all, amazing to see you here in person. You're like one of my biggest legends.
Thank you.
Here. And I read your posts on the future with AI, generative AI a few months ago, I think. I was wondering, when you look at autonomous AI, the new generation of it, because I invented from 1986, the Society of Mind of Marvin Minsky, with first ideas in the 90s.
That was rule-based systems, and that really weren't AI.
Yeah, it was, but like that kind of thing inspired us. But when you look at the future, especially with near symbolic AI, where do you think autonomous agents can make the most impact on our economics?
Did you all hear that in the back? sort of? Yeah.
So the question-
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Where's autonomous AI going to make the most impact going forward?
Yeah, and that's
So-
coming from safety, we're going to come with agents.
Autonomous agents.
Yeah, so I think the notion of agents is orthogonal to the idea of what kind of AI you're using. You can have transformer-based agents, you can have neurosymbolic agents, and in fact, multiple agent types